So Giannis, I'm not even going to try to say his last name. He's the star of the Milwaukee Bucks. He's also known as the Greek Freak. Giannis just won the NBA MVP. And there's a really interesting narrative here, if you ask me. It's actually, it came down to two people. It came down to either James Harden of the Houston Rockets or Giannis from the Milwaukee Bucks. And I'm going to do something I do not do very often. I think stats are boring. I'm not into stats very much. But I want to compare the stats of Giannis and James Harden because I think it's very interesting if you look at what happened. James Harden had better stats in almost every category and came in second by a lot. Giannis won by a lot, even though his stats in most categories were not as good. James Harden had more points per game. James Harden had 36.1 points per game. Giannis had 27.7. James Harden had a better three-point percentage, 36.8 versus 25.6. He had more total points by a lot. James Harden had 2,818 points, where Giannis only had 1,914 or 994. So Giannis had almost 1,000 fewer points than James Harden. James Harden had more assists, 586. Giannis only had 424. James Harden had an 87.9% free throw percentage, which is far better than Giannis, who had a 72.9% free throw percentage. There are only really two categories I found that stood out to me where Giannis had better stats. He had a better overall field goal percentage because Giannis scores inside all the time around the rim. That raises his field goal percentage. Giannis had a 57.8% field goal percentage. James Harden had a 44.2% field goal percentage. Giannis also had far more rebounds. Giannis had 898 rebounds. James Harden only had 518. Here's a stat that blew my mind. James Harden had way more steals than Giannis. James Harden had 158 steals. Giannis only had 92. And that's a guy, James Harden, who's known for not being good at defense and giving terrible effort on defense, had more steals. I was just surprised by that. I just couldn't believe it. He also played far more minutes. 2,867 minutes compared to 2,358. Just James Harden played more minutes per game, scored way more. For the most part, James Harden had all-around better stats than Giannis. And it's interesting, you can argue that James Harden should have won because he had better stats. And I think it's a fair argument. But what's even more interesting is that last year, James Harden won the NBA MVP. And this year, his stats are better than they were last year. So James Harden won MVP last year, had a better year this year, and didn't win this year. He had more total points this year than last year. Last year, he had 2,191. This year, at 2,818. He had a better three-point percentage, slightly higher, 36.8 versus 36.7. He had more points per game, 36.1 versus 30. He had more steals, 158 versus 126. A higher free throw percentage, 87.9 up from 85.8. And he played more minutes per game. What's interesting to me is James Harden had better stats than last year, when last year he won the MVP and he didn't win it this year. I think this can all be easily explained. In fact, Giannis won. I have no problem with Giannis winning the MVP. I agree with it. I think it's great. It's just interesting. It's just curious, Guy had better numbers than the guy who won MVP and had better numbers than last year when he won MVP, still didn't win. Giannis had 78 first-place votes. James Harden had 23. Nobody else got one, which means that Giannis won by a landslide. And my whole takeaway from this is not outrage. I don't care. I think I'm very happy Giannis won. I liked his speech. I thought it was great. My takeaway is this. It is much, much harder to win your second MVP. Winning your first MVP is a lot easier than winning your second. A large part of winning the NBA MVP is story. We all can acknowledge it. It's honest, it's true. The more MVPs you win, the harder it is to win again. Ask LeBron James. LeBron James has been the best player. I don't know if he still is, but there was a stretch where for like 10 years, best player in the world, didn't win another MVP. Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double 3 years ago, won an MVP. He did it a second time the next year. Nobody cared. They gave the MVP to James Harden instead. James Harden dominated statistically last year. Had even better stats this year than he did last year, and nobody cared. Everybody moved on to Giannis. And I don't have a problem with that at all. But I'm pointing out that it's much harder to win your second MVP. There has to be a stick. There has to be a story. There has to be something behind it. For Russell Westbrook, this thing was triple doubles. For James Harden, the thing was stats. You're dominating. But those storylines get old and we throw them away, move on to something new. I'm pointing out that clearly part of why people vote for the NBA MVP is to get a new guy involved, to promote a new guy, to hype up a new guy. It's part of the thing. It's part of there's not a consistent criteria for NBA MVP. It's whatever the heck story feels best at the moment. And today, the best story was Giannis. That felt great. I loved watching his speech. But there's no consistency here. There's no logic. There's no reason other than, Giannis is a better story than James Harden because James Harden won last year. And once you win an NBA MVP, the way you're judged goes dramatically higher before you can win another. It gets much harder to win your second MVP than your first. Because the storyline you used last time doesn't work a second time. You had the best stats in the NBA? That's what we said last time. This time you got to have something new. Oh, you don't? Then whatever. Now here's what I loved about Giannis winning the NBA MVP. I've pointed out that I think it's weird and interesting, but I'm okay with it. But I loved his speech. Giannis' speech was raw. It was authentic. The dude didn't use any notes. It was messy, but I liked that the guy's crying on stage. I love that he thanked his team. He thanked their effort. He thanked his coaches. And what got me about Giannis' speech was when he talked about his dad dying. Talked about how his dad motivates him and his dad helped him get there. I've been through loss. Loss is one of my favorite, I guess it's one of my favorite topics. I mean, it's hard. It's a really meaningful thing when you lose someone you love. 2 years ago, Giannis' dad died, and he talked about how it helped him. This is the quote that I want to give from Giannis' speech. He said, "Even when my body's sore, even when I don't feel like playing, I always show up and do the right thing." And he talks about how thinking about his dad and his family motivates him, and that is so cool. My dad and I are pretty close, and I just think it's beautiful. And I've been searching for motivation for a long time. I think for a long time it was anger, and then it became a feeling of not being good enough. I've talked about it on my show many times, and I'm trying to transition into thinking of my family and the people I love and working hard for them to give them the dreams that I want for them and give them what I can. And that's a really hard thing to get motivated by, but it's a beautiful motivation if you can find it. And the fact that Giannis talked about his family, his siblings, his mom, his dad, and how they inspired him and make him work hard. That was my favorite part of Giannis winning the NBA MVP was his motivation, where it comes from. I think that's a cool example. I loved that. His speech was beautiful. And I had no problem with him winning. Again, that's how I've accepted that's how the NBA works. There's not logic. You can't use the same storyline as last time. Russell Westbrook will never win another MVP because he got averaged a triple-double. If he does it the rest of his career, it never will matter anymore because we already used that one. James Harden can dominate statistically. He'll probably never win another one because he already won an MVP for dominating statistically. Giannis won this year because there's no one else, and he was awesome. He elevated his play, helped his team, brought his team to a great place, and played awesome. I had no problem with Giannis winning. I loved his speech, and I've accepted that's how the NBA works. The NBA loves to uplift new people, and it's much harder to win your second NBA MVP than your first. My name is Zach Schaumler. This is my podcast, Strong Opinion Sports, and it is my favorite thing in the entire world. I love it. It is my dream to do this show, and it's my full-time job. And if you want to help support me, there's a couple things you can do. Number one, help me grow by telling your friends about Strong Opinion Sports. Share this on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, I don't care. Screenshot it, put it on your Instagram story. Do me a giant favor, help me grow by telling your friends about the show. That's the number one way you can help me no matter what. Another way you can help me if you want, you can support me on Patreon or PayPal. It's a huge help to me. My PayPal is paypal.me/Zach Schaumler. My Patreon account is patreon.com/Zach Schaumler. If you have no money to give, no problem. I totally understand. I'm a broke college kid myself. I get it. I've been there. But please, I ask, if you want to support me, the number one thing you can do to help me is tell your friends about Strong Opinion Sports. Share it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. Help me grow by telling your friends about this podcast. My name is Zach Schaumler. Thank you so much, and have a great day.